Hey guys, what's going on? It's Eli, and with me, my dad, aka Little Blue. The 1970s, it was definitely the decade of films. Groundbreaking films, game changers, so much. And up to the late 70s, in 1978, there would be one film that not only would be another one of those films in the 70s that would be a big game changer, it would make film history, but it would especially change the superhero genre forever. Definitely. Because there weren't really that many, superhero movies back then, especially like this one and from there on. And when this came out, and with the tagline, "You will believe that a man could fly." And it for sure made us believe that. So that's right, guys. Welcome to the Superman Review Marathon. And obviously, with my dad joining me, of course, we are reviewing from 1978, Superman, the movie. Because as of nowadays, it has the movie in the title. But I think back then it was just called Superman. So, okay, so the first things we have to say about Superman, the movie, well, because I'll go, because I really can't recall, my recollection and first memories of, and my introduction to the character of Superman. And especially because with, the Superman that we know and love, which of course being this Superman, which being Christopher Reeve. And I seem to recall that, I believe, my fullest memory of watching one of these movies was the Richard Donner cut of Superman 2. But I mean, eventually, I of course did see the other Superman films, and of course this. And, the first Superman film, because, first off, there's really not much of a story going on. But at the same time, it's still fantastic. It's nice, it's surprising to see that the fact that there's not much of a story going on in Superman the movie, it's still fantastic. And the fact that this was another big film in the 70s, and for the superhero genre, with what Richard Donner, the Salkins, Christopher Reeve, everybody that worked on the first Superman film was extraordinary. And especially for a lot of people in 1978 that first saw this movie, there's no denying that, with Superman the movie, it's a masterpiece of a superhero film, definitely. So, that's pretty much all I've got to say with the first things I have to say about Superman movie. But now we'll turn to you, because I'm sure you've got a lot with the first things you have to say about Superman the movie. So the floor is yours now.
I don't think I could top what you just said, really. That was just really, that was very, very nicely put. I will add this, though. I do remember the positioning statement for the movie. It was billed as "You will believe a man can fly." And I have to say, there was a lot of scenes from Superman, but there was one especially where Superman, it's when he first reveals himself as Superman. When he saves Lois Lane when the chopper's falling off the top of the World Trade Center and all. And then he flies off.
Actually, it's the Daily Planet.
Yeah, the Daily Planet. Okay, so he flies off.
Right. Well, you got to talk about the first things you have to say about the movie.
Well, I'm telling you, this is one thing that impressed me about it.
Okay.
When he flies in and he rescues the cat out of the tree, and he lands and gives it to the little girl, and he says, bye now, and he flies off, and you're watching this, and how the heck did they do that? Because you don't see any wires, and it's a very smooth. He just takes off.
Especially
waves, looks back at her and waves.
Especially in the nighttime, when he's flying.
But in the 70s, this was 1978 when this came out.
And just 1 year after Star Wars.
And I do recall that in the White House at the time was Jimmy Carter.
Jimmy Carter.
Whom actually is the only president that I ever met when he was governor of Georgia. I met him when I was a very young man.
I bet you guys didn't know about that from my dad, so now you know.
And because my dad was in the state legislature, West Virginia state legislature, and he was pretty well connected. He was in it for 16 years, and we went on, I called it a political junket trip. It was a trip that Mom and I went with him to Georgia, Savannah, Georgia, and we were there for about a week. And I think from there, we went on to Disney World, or something like that. But anyway, Carter was at that time he was the governor of Georgia, and I met him on the elevator, and Dad said to me, "Matthew, you know who this is?" And I looked at him, and I said, "No." He said, "This is the governor of Georgia." And I shook his hand. He's got that southern drawl, and he says, "Hello there, young man." And he shook my hand, and it was really cool. And then when he got to be president, I'm like, "Yeah, I met a president," And Jimmy Carter, when he was president, took his daughter. Amy Carter is her name.
Yes.
Took her to see Superman.
Mm-hmm.
the movie. And I thought that was really cool that the President of the United States took his daughter to see, they went to see Superman. And I thought that was very cool.
Yeah.
That's one of the things I remember about it. But it's a fantastic movie. We've talked about this. It doesn't really have the strongest of plots.
No.
But it's enough to keep your attention.
Yeah.
It does have a storyline, and it's a good story. And it's,
One that's at the beginning and another that's at the very, like in the third act. But until we get to them. But yeah, but we talked about this, like, okay, because, the first things you have to say about the Superman movie, well, you didn't see this in theaters when it first came out.
No, I did not.
No.
I did see Superman 2 in the theaters when it first came out.
But then you eventually saw Superman the movie on HBO. So.
Well, I saw that. I actually did see Superman the movie before I saw Superman 2.
And yeah, but that's a good thing you did.
And I did see it on HBO, years ago when you could get HBO on cable and all that.
And you were amazed, right? Because
yeah, I was really impressed. I thought it was really good, and I thought Christopher Reeve. He to me was the best Superman of all because he humanized that character.
he definitely had the likeness.
He had the likeness. He was
the perfect body build for Superman. Everything
he did, and he was not overly muscular. He wasn't like Henry Cavill, who is really muscular. He's got a beautiful physique.
Especially his suit having muscle marks.
And all that. But I mean, the Christopher Reeve
as
Superman,
if that's really necessary, but the way that the suit looks, definitely, because it's spitting out perfect image of the Superman suit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I thought I thought he was just excellent as Superman. And I remember going into when they used to have the backlot tour at Disney.
Yes.
And
yes, I know what you're talking
at
about.
Hollywood Studios, and they had.
Once you get off the backlot ride, then you go into
into this. It's like a museum, and it's artifacts from
like
movies.
AFI also to it. So
I mean, they even had the staff
of
that Charlton Heston used in Moses and the Ten Commandments. I was like, I felt like I was looking at I was actually looking at Moses' staff, and I had to tell myself, okay, that's just a movie prop.
Now imagine if they had the Ten Commandments themselves in the movie.
Well,
but point being is that at the backlot they had one of the Superman capes.
It was gorgeous.
I do remember that too.
I was in awe when I saw that because they had it on display and they had it splayed out, and it was just spread out, and it was beautiful. I mean, it was beautiful.
Oh yeah.
And you're just looking at that, and you're thinking, man, I'd love to put that on and go out and jump up in the air and fly.
And since I mentioned AFI, because even Superman making its way to the heroes list of AFI.
Yeah, and I'm going to tell you this. I will tell you this. I'm going to interject this.
Okay.
When I saw Superman 2 at the movie theater,
and then we got to get to the description / the story. So
when I saw Superman 2,
and to wrap up your thoughts,
yes,
all right, go ahead.
When I saw Superman 2 at the movie theater, when I walked out of the movie theater, now I was a teenager when I saw it, so I was young. I walked out of that movie theater, and I was actually depressed because I couldn't fly. That's how much I got into that movie and the whole thing of Superman flying.
I could imagine
I walked out, and I'm like,
others,
and I just thought, man, I wish I could fly. That's so depressing.
Don't we all wish?
but it was that's the impact it had on me. And even the first Superman movie. So
right.
You want me to do this?
Yeah, but just overall, you even as of now, even looking back on it now, because it still holds up, and it is still a superhero movie masterpiece.
Absolutely, a movie masterpiece. And the funny thing is, some people, Superman's not even my favorite superhero. I mean, my favorite superhero is Batman. But you see,
there's just something about Superman that you just gotta appreciate and love. I
love Superman. Don't get me wrong.
Me too.
I love Superman.
Me too.
But the Batman is my favorite. That's just me. He's been my favorite since I was a kid.
I mean, yeah. From Batman and Superman, they're the two biggies of DC Comics.
Oh, of course they are.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay.
So the overview.
Now as always, and you could take it from here. Read the description / the story. Take it away.
The overview of Superman. Just before the destruction of the planet Krypton, scientist Jor-El, played by Marlon Brando, sends his infant son Kal-El on a spaceship to Earth, raised by kindly farmers Jonathan, played by Glenn Ford, and Martha Kent, played by Phyllis Thaxter.
Yeah.
Young Clark, played by Christopher Reeve, discovers the source of his superhuman powers, and moves to Metropolis to fight evil. As Superman, he battles the villainous Lex Luthor, played by Gene Hackman, wonderful role for him.
Yes.
While as novice reporter Clark Kent, he attempts to woo co-worker Lois Lane, played by Margot Kidder.
Yep.
So,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so now let's break down the movie and so on. Now, first off, the opening to this movie, because it was interesting the way this movie started, where, like this movie theater screen in 1938. Yeah, like, what do you say on that? Because, in the day of Metropolis and such, and like this comic book, if you know what I'm talking about, of course.
I'm not.
Oh, okay.
I don't know what you're talking about.
That is the opening of Superman the movie, because the movie theater curtains open in June 1938, and something about Metropolis, and and then after that, because then the opening credits start with John Williams' music and score.
Didn't they add that later?
No, they did. No. It is in the film.
Okay, well, I'm gonna have to go home and watch it tonight because I'm missing something. I don't know how I missed that.
All right, and let's stick with this. Let's continue. Okay. So, but the opening, like anything to say on the opening credits, with John Williams' music and score there.
I love that score. And anything John Williams.
And to think that because
has his name on.
This is right after This is right after Williams did Star Wars.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this, what was I can't remember if we've talked about this the many times we've talked about movies and even the mentioning of John Williams. How were you introduced to John Williams?
I was introduced to John Williams through Star Wars.
Yeah. I mean, even before Star Wars, he did Jaws. That was another biggie.
That was probably, I probably heard that theme and thought it's just this,
didn't have full knowledge of Williams at that time, I guess.
No, I didn't. But my real exposure to John Williams was Star Wars, I'll have to say. That was the full impact.
I think that's you got it right.
But you cannot mistake a John Williams score. You can't mistake it for anybody else because it has a sound his music, his composition has a sound all its own. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And he writes masterpieces that are the greatest movie scores ever.
Yeah. Even Richard Donner mentioned this, that when hearing the Superman theme in those bars, dun 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 dun, Richard feels that it's the music is saying Superman.
Yeah, it's Superman, the Man of Steel. That's almost how you want to sing it when he's
probably so.
But it is, the music is perfect for that is the perfect score for Superman.
Yeah. Let's just say that, John Williams' Superman theme is the definitive Superman theme.
It is.
All right, so, then after that, because, the whole thing on Krypton, the trial, and Krypton will soon be destroyed, anything to say on all that, because...
Well, you're talking about the three villains. The
three Kryptonian criminals, yes.
Yeah, that are put in the Phantom Zone. And
General Zod, Terrence Stamp, Non, Jack O'Halloran, and Ursa, Sarah Douglas. They're all three of them are on trial, and Jor-El taking the spot, and Jor-El, Marlon Brando.
And they of course they accuse him. They want revenge. Because he is their jailer. That's what they call him. He is their jailer. And it's because Zod trying to convince Jor-El to join them because Jor-El has disagreed with the council at times. Exactly.
Yeah.
And they swear vengeance against him, and when they find out,
you will bow down before me.
And when they
both
find out,
you and then one day your ass.
When they find out that Kal-El is Clark Kent Superman is living on Earth. Mm-hmm. That's when they decide to move. When they find out he's there, Zod is he's got blood in his eyes. He wants him killed.
Yeah, and all of the elders they're the elders of Krypton.
Yeah.
So
yeah, but they all say guilty.
Yes, they do.
They all say guilty, and so Jor-El is not he's not alone. He is. They all are in agreement.
At least they're all in agreement on those three. So
exactly.
Yeah, but wasn't that cool? Just with that opening of the film with the trial, and then when they're placed in their space prison, which it's basically the Phantom Zone.
Yeah, because it's a perfect dovetail into Superman 2. It shows continuity. And I think adds realism to the whole plot of Superman.
Yes. And the fact that, in case you knew about this back then, that Superman's 1 and 2 were actually being filmed simultaneously. Yep.
And we know that they're broken out of the Phantom Zone in Superman 2 because of the nuclear bomb that's in the elevator of the...
But in the Donner cut, it's a missile.
Yeah, well, but in that, that's why I like that version, because because it's in the elevator in the Eiffel Tower.
All right, but let's get back on the first Superman film.
All right, sorry.
So then the whole thing on Jor-El trying to get all of them to, because that Krypton is soon to be destroyed by the sun.
Yes.
But all of the elders and such, they just flat out don't believe this.
Yeah, it's it was a no sell for them. Even though Jor-El told him, and warned him, tried to warn him, but didn't. They just wouldn't hear of it. And then that's when Jor-El decided that he was going to make sure his son survived, and built the ship and put him in it, which I thought was actually a pretty cool looking ship. It kind of reminds me of a Christmas ornament, the way it looks, because it does. It looks like it's all pointy, and it looks like one of these ornaments you'd put on a Christmas tree. In fact, I've seen ornaments that look like it, and I would swear it was the Superman ship. Because that's what it looks like.
Uh-huh.
And then, of course, when it comes into when it enters the Earth's atmosphere, all the points they just kind of burn off, and they just kind of curl up. It's really cool how they do that.
Mm-hmm. But wasn't it awesome, like seeing the planet Krypton and the wardrobes that all of them had on? They were like the white glowing and such.
Oh yeah, they were. They really
how they achieved that was excellent.
Yeah, it was really something to see.
And by the way, in case you didn't also catch this detail, where we see Jor-El with this symbol,
Yes.
Because cleverly, it was decided that could be like, say, the family crest of Jor-El and that family.
Yeah.
Because all the other Kryptons, Kryptonians, I should say, they have different symbols on their wardrobes.
Which I thought was a very neat way to explain that, because when Superman was first created, they put the S on his chest, and the S stands for Superman, and you never really get a background of why that S is there. And it's not even an S.
No.
It's to us it's an S.
It looks like it does look look like an S, but
looks
it's
like
not
an S,
really.
but it's not. It's whatever language, and I can't remember when we the Superman movie that came out with Henry Cavill, when he
Man
explains
of Steel.
when he explains what it is.
It's hope. I think.
Hope, I think, is what it means, but it still looks like an S. So it's S, and they start to say Superman, but they never finish it.
Yeah. Yeah, he didn't get that name himself, like everybody did,
Yeah.
And most prominently Lois Lane. And also Jor-El's wife, the mother of Superman, Lara, played by Susanna York.
Yep.
And, because the time approaches for them to save their son
Yes.
from Krypton's destruction, and
They put him in the capsule.
Yep.
And seal it up. And,
Placing a green crystal in there.
And which is going to give him his power, his to power his, Fortress of Solitude.
And some great dialogue that Jor-El says right before, their son disembarks.
But
such.
it's really interesting is that they have that while he is on that ship, he is being educated, and his father has recorded.
And it's a long journey to Earth.
It's a long journey to Earth, and he grows several years.
Yeah,
he's a toddler by the time he gets to Earth, but he has already amassed so much information that his father stored in that ship for him, and it's not just history like Earth history. It's planetary history,
exactly,
from all the known planets in the universe that they know of. So by the time he gets to Earth, he is already better educated than your average 4-year-old.
Yes.
he's like genius level, really.
Right. And the destruction of Krypton, that was intense,
It was intense.
And everybody's screaming, literally.
Yeah,
and they're falling to their deaths.
But they're also floating. I mean, you see them.
Yes, they're floating.
It's like the gravity. But that's the reason why when Kal-El,
Jor-El or Kal-El.
Kal-El is
yes, is Superman.
Is Superman. Yeah. When he comes to Earth, this is why he gets the sun.
Yeah.
That heats the Earth. That's where he draws his strength from.
Yeah.
And you see, he is more powerful than anybody else on Earth because of the fact that he comes from Krypton, and the Krypton sun was weaker than our sun. Mm-hmm. So he draws extra strength from our sun, and it gives him superpowers.
Yep. And then when seeing, Pa Kent and Ma Kent as they're credited, but we know their names are Jonathan and Martha.
Yes, exactly.
Because they're them discovering Kal-El, and even like Jonathan was thinking that they should find whomever the parents are, but what just happened? I don't think they're going to find the parents, because...
Well, they said that, and I thought it was funny because when they first find him, they get him in the truck, and he has to, his Pa Kent, has to Glenn Ford's character has to change a flat tire.
But he's got to take it very easy on account of his heart condition.
Right, and I think the jack fails. And he falls down.
It slips, and
then,
luckily, baby Kal-El
picks it up, and they're just like, because this kid's
they gotta be very careful with young Kal-El. So,
and I thought it was when he got, when you see a little later, you see
yes, and young Clark Kent being played by young Jeff East.
Yes, and Pa Kent when he dies, he has a heart attack. And dies right there. And that's what was sad.
Even before that, because seeing teenage Clark Kent, and because life for him kind of mixed, and especially at high school. At least there's some people that do like him, except for Brad. Young Brad being played by Brad Flock, and he's a jerk to Clark. Then Lana Lang being played by young Diane Cherry Case, whom, by the way, we would see those characters again in Superman 3. So
yeah, and it is sad because he was kind of an outcast because he was.
But not all of them treated him like an outcast. Most prominently, Lana Lang didn't.
Part of the reason it was because he could not display his powers, and he knew, and he told he said, I can play football. He said, I can.
Even kicking that football, or when he's kind of having a race with a train.
Yeah, and young Lois Lane is on the train. That was really cool.
That's apparently young Lois Lane.
That is young Lois Lane.
Although it's in the extended cut of this movie, so not in the theatrical version.
And she's like, Mom, I just saw, and he says, oh, Lois, and you know it's Lois Lane.
Yes.
You know it's Lois Lane. So, pretty cool. Pretty cool.
By the way, did you happen to realize that Jeff East, his voice was dubbed by Reeves?
No.
Yes, it was, because fun fact, the studio was worried that, Jeff East's voice didn't sound deep enough. So that's when Christopher Reeve stepped in and dubbed Jeff's voice, and then at the premiere, Jeff found out about this at the premiere, and Donner and Reeve, they approached and they apologized to Jeff and explaining why his voice was dubbed.
Yeah.
And that was very sweet and kind of both Reeve and Dick Donner, so...
Yeah. And that makes sense. I mean, there's a lot of actors that have to have voices. They have to overdub their own voices because
it depends.
It depends upon the situation because the mic doesn't always pick it up clearly, and they need it to be redone, and they'll go in and recut it.
Another thing that Jeff East had to have besides the dubbing was a prosthetic nose, to match Christopher's.
Oh, I didn't know that.
That's true.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah,
that is pretty cool.
But yeah, the whole thing of unfortunately, Pa Kent sadly dying, and he gave some good advice, as you mentioned, to Clark. Because he's here for a purpose, and so on. And then after that, the whole funeral. Then Clark making the discovery where he comes from. When he discovers the green crystal, and so on.
Yes.
And even Martha knew that the time was coming. The time would come for Clark to discover who he really is. And Clark knows where to go. He has to go up north. And apparently, because, Martha and Clark, they say their goodbyes. And this is apparently the last we see of Martha Kent, besides Jonathan Kent. Yeah, we don't get Martha Kent anymore in this.
Yeah, which is kind of...
Even in the sequels.
Kind of weird to me. I think, but he does...
But it was done okay.
He mentions his mom. He does mention his mom, even in Superman 2. He's talking about... something came up about him mailing some of his money to his mom, and I know that came up in I think in Superman 2. So there's at least mention of her, and you have to figure that he has regular contact with her. And let's face it, he can fly to her.
Yes,
and probably in less than 2 minutes he can make it to her, fly to her house.
Yep.
Hey, Mom, I'm home.
Yeah, but then when he makes his travel to the north, and then discovering and using the green crystal to rise this Fortress of Solitude.
Yeah, which is very cool.
And then discovering Jor-El, and then apparently for 12 years he's been taught more from Jor-El. They can be a great people, Kal-El, they wish to be, and so much more. The human heart, everything. And then when the time comes, he's in the getup, the suit.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But anything to say on when he first makes his way to the Fortress of Solitude and so on?
I thought it was really cool. It's a pilgrimage that he's on. It's a journey that he knows he has to get to.
And
and to get north, he just knows that's where he has to go.
Mm-hmm. And since this was brought up earlier, kind of cool, kind of as an example, like similar to like what Moses had to do, something like that. If you know where I'm going with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then because then like he's in the Superman suit, and then we see him now a part of the Daily Planet.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a.
And this is where we're introduced from, say, Jackie Cooper as Perry White, and Jimmy Olsen, Mark McClure, and most prominently, Margot Kidder as Lois Lane.
Yeah. Those were all good characters.
And then when we finally see Clark Kent, Christopher Reeve himself there.
Yeah, and he finally. It's funny when they first Lois Lane. He ends up saving her life, and this is the first time we see Superman. In the flesh, doing his thing, and I think it was really funny because he's trying to find a phone booth, and here's a phone booth. It's just a half a phone booth that you used to see a long time ago. You just walk up and pick up the phone. You didn't get
you would most probably see those in Britain. So
yeah, so he goes. So then he changes in a revolving door, which I thought was pretty cool. But I love it when he walks out. And the guy...
Yeah, by this point, we're just going to be talking random, because in the middle of the film, there's really not much going on.
No,
so.
And the black guy standing there goes, "Whoa, Jack, what, that's a...
Yeah.
However he says it, that's, a sharp suit or something,
because
whatever he says.
This started with, like, Lois was going to get on a chopper.
Yeah, and Superman's like, excuse me.
Yeah. and the chopper having been caught by some wires and such.
Yeah,
and
And so she's in serious trouble. I mean, she's in peril. She's going to die.
And this is where finally Superman makes his debut to the public.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, everybody's reaction, I thought it was pretty genuine.
They seem to handle it pretty well.
How people would react,
even the police.
So yeah, it was pretty cool.
It's nice to see it didn't take them that long to get used to the presence of Superman.
Exactly, but he catches Lois Lane and he says, "Don't worry, miss, I've got you." She said, "You've got me. Who's got you?"
Yes. And then when he catches the helicopter.
He catches the helicopter one-handed, and, you're just like, oh, this is so cool.
In fact, earlier when Clark and Lois were having a talk, and then, like, some robber, brought them in an alleyway. Remember that part?
Yeah.
Yeah. Clark surviving and just pretending that he fainted. Didn't get shot by the bullet.
He caught the bullet in his hand.
Mm-hmm. Yes, he did.
He caught it in his hand.
Yeah.
And saved Lois, saved them both.
That's right.
So, yeah.
And after the whole helicopter rescue and, Lois, first meeting Superman, who are you? A friend.
Yeah.
And she faints after that.
Yeah.
And then other stuff that Superman was doing, like stopping these robbers that were, hijacking boats.
Oh, yeah.
That, and as you mentioned, like, Superman saving a cat from a tree and saving a plane that was, going down.
Now, here's an interesting story. A friend of one of my teachers in high school, her name at the time was Lynn Clendenin, and now it's Lynn Baldwin. She married Gary Baldwin, who's the football coach at Sherman High School, where I graduated high school, just down the road here. But it's now Lynn Baldwin because she married Coach Baldwin. They started dating when they were both teachers in high school, and we thought it was sweet.
This has to do something with Superman?
It does indeed.
All right.
So Lynn Baldwin, when she was young, she was a model. Beautiful, beautiful woman. It still is, as a matter of fact. And she was a model, and she was an extra in the Superman movie.
Okay.
When Superman brings the boat to the police headquarters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
he sets it down in front of police headquarters.
Yeah, and that one policeman telling, I guess, the main one up the front desk, about what's happened, and doesn't believe it, but then when seeing it, the first bottle's on me,
Lynn Baldwin is in that scene. She is one of the extras in that scene when the crowd that's gathered in front of the police headquarters, when Superman sets the boat down, she is in that scene.
Cool.
So, and I've never spotted her. I need to go back and watch it.
I will have to as well.
It was pretty cool. It's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. But anything else to say on what else Superman does that same evening? From the boats, the plane,
he's pretty busy.
Yeah.
He gets pretty busy, which I thought was pretty cool because it's like he's just kind of he's kind of stretching his cape, so to speak, and
the citizens of Metropolis are seeing that, yeah, this man right here is here to save the day.
And there to help.
Exactly.
And he's a friend,
And he's on the same side as, like, say, the policemen and all that.
Yeah, and you never get... That's one thing I love about it. You never get the impression from anybody that he's a bad guy.
Exactly.
He's a good guy. He's never misunderstood. Like, the Batman was misunderstood. He was. And all that. And certain other superheroes throughout, comics history.
Well, even in, like, say, Man of Steel, they misunderstood Superman at first.
Yeah, they did.
Okay, but continuing on, because, and let's go ahead and talk about the villains,
Yeah.
Because one of the first characters we see is actually one of the henchmen, Otis, being played by the late Ned Beatty. So.
Yeah, and he's kind of an idiot. His character's kind of an idiot.
Yep.
And he's, kind of bumbling, and he just...
And there's two, like, policemen or something on Otis's tail.
Yeah, and he dodged, he...
Following them down to this subway, and in this abandoned part of the subway.
And he manages to avert them,
Yep. Luthor being played by the late Gene Hackman. Yep.
Yeah, but I think what's...
And already we can see that Luthor is... Well, and as Miss Tessmacher specifically says, that he's sick. He is. I mean...
Well,
and Eve Tessmacher being played by Valerie Perrine, so...
Yes, but Miss Tessmacher and...
Miss Tessmacher!
Yeah, and...
I just had to. I love when he does that.
Miss Tessmacher and Otis, you have to... They're not the sharpest knives in the drawer, okay?
Not the best henchman that Luthor has.
But Luthor is supposedly...
But Luthor manages to put up with them.
You can't figure out if he's really that smart or he just looks so smart because they're so dumb. But apparently he's very smart.
Oh, yeah.
He does,
and even referring to himself as the greatest criminal mind in the world.
Yeah, well, and he is. He's a pretty smart guy.
By the way, like some of those computer displays he has, and by pushing that one guy, out to be crushed by that train.
Oh, yeah.
Some of that computer stuff is actually the same computer stuff that we see in Episode 4, Star Wars. The part where, TK421, why aren't you at your post? That computer display, some of that.
Oh, it's some of the same... Okay.
The black and buttons and such, that. Yeah. Well, and especially, not to mention, have to acknowledge this, that Superman, the first two Superman films, I should say, being most prominently filmed at the famous Pinewood Studios for Star Wars and James Bond.
Well, it was in Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back, where where all the bounty hunters are gathered together, and I can't remember the bounty hunter's name. It just escapes me all of a sudden. It fell out of my head, but he's actually wearing an old costume that was used in an old Doctor Who episode.
Yes, that's right.
I just can't remember who it was. It's but he's kind of a lizard type. He's the one that when one of the Imperial officers,
Bosk, yeah.
But he walks by, he goes,
let's look at
exactly. So they recycle stuff. You just have to catch
they have. They did back then. So,
yeah.
But anything else to say on the villains, and even most prominently Gene Hackman as Lex Luthor?
Gene Hackman, his character, he was over the top. He played it very well. I thought he played it very well. I loved his character.
Yeah, and by the way, the fact that both Hackman and Brando, they were the two top billing stars.
Yeah.
Well, and technically this was, and Christopher Reeve wasn't, even though he's the title character.
Well, he was an unknown.
Exactly.
He was a complete unknown.
That's what they were going for, finding an unknown, someone good for Superman.
Exactly, and he was very good.
Some of the actors they were considering before Reeve stepped in, like apparently like Paul Newman and Clint Eastwood were considered. Now, could you imagine if they played Superman? Well, Paul Newman was not only considered for Superman, but he was also considered for Luthor. Maybe that could have been acceptable.
That could have been. Yeah, I can't see Clint Eastwood as Superman
or Paul Newman.
Yeah, I mean, I can't see Superman standing there looking at Lex Luthor and say, "Go ahead, punk, make my day."
Up and away.
Exactly.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
But and here's another thing, because Gene Hackman, do you recall that Gene Hackman used to sport a mustache,
Oh, yeah.
Well, here's the thing. Donner managed to convince Hackman to shave his mustache because, Donner would shave his mustache. Look, I'll shave my mustache if you shave yours. And here's the thing. Donner pulled a prank on Hackman because he had a fake mustache on, and Hackman just like, hey, I thought you didn't, and then just, he ripped off the fake mustache. And here's another funny story, because that has to do with Marlon Brando, because on the first day, and according from Terrence Stamp and Brando had a conversation, and Terrence doing his Brando impression, and I'll do my Brando impression too, because between Brando and Terrence, have you read the script? Yes, haven't you? No. Why haven't you? Because it could be real crap and I need the money.
You sound like him. That's good.
Yeah. And I did my Terrence Stamp impression, but that's apparently what happened. But eventually, here's the thing. Brando did eventually read the script, and he was a full supporter of the first Superman film. Yeah. And that's good to see.
Well, the funny thing is it's you talk about him shaving his mustache off. It's like
Hackman.
Cesar Romero refused to shave his mustache off to be
but it managed to
be
work.
The Joker, and it worked fine.
Yeah.
He looked great.
Even looking at the merchandise of that Joker, including the mustache.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He looked great. So
Yeah, but here's another thing. Hackman wasn't too fond of going bald for Lex Luthor. That's why this Lex Luthor would have like a wig, and that's what it basically is. But Hackman was okay at least being bald just for when Luthor is in prison. So
yeah.
So at least he did that, because we have to have the baldness.
Sure.
And don't you think like the whole thing of Luthor having like a toupee/wig was okay?
Yeah, it was fine.
Because it seemed to work with this variant of Luthor.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and by the way, we didn't say that much of Brando's Jor-El. Anything else on Brando and Superman as Jor-El?
I thought he was a perfect choice for Jor-El.
And the performance that he delivers for Jor-El, and with the dialogue, the way he delivers the dialogue, it's so good.
Yeah, well, Brando he was a top-notch actor.
Of course.
Golly. You just don't get much better than Marlon Brando. I'm sorry.
Or see Gene Hackman.
Yeah, exactly. Both of them are A-list actors.
Exactly.
Or were A-list actors. So when you get that, and when you've got that going for you in a movie, that's going to pull some serious weight.
Yes. And coming back to more of Superman and Lois Lane, because where Lois Lane attempts to interview Superman, and even this was interesting because Superman checking the back of Lois's, like her kidneys and such, whatever, because of smoking.
Well, her lungs is what
lungs. I'm sorry,
not her
lungs.
kidneys.
My
her
bad.
lungs. Yeah, that's right.
And
wrong organ.
I know. I got it mixed up.
Sorry.
But that was clever, and because thankfully, Lois is okay because she's been smoking, but hasn't made it to like having cancer or something.
Exactly.
Lung cancer.
Exactly.
And then like the whole thing where Superman flies Lois around Metropolis.
Yeah,
what about that sequence?
Well,
and with the beautiful music that accompanies that sequence, and composed by John Williams.
Yeah, and it was a good sequence, but I think what kind of still, even when I watch it, I kind of scratch my head because it just kind of seems out of place when Lois Lane is reading this poem. Doing this poem. It's this poem with this music, and it's like, can you read my mind?
Exactly.
And it's like,
I was going to mention that, of course.
Yeah,
the whole thing that Superman can apparently. I guess it's okay where he can read minds.
The first time I saw it, I thought, what? Why are they doing this? This seems a little out of place. This seems a little weird. It's a little artsy, but I guess it works. But it just seemed to me out of place, and even to this day, it seems a little out of place. But I'm going to have to go back and watch this movie probably tonight.
Yeah,
so,
but also, like something else about the romantic flying scene. Well, just the fact that Lois starts to fall in love with Superman. And little does she know that Superman is also Clark Kent. And, the whole thing of Lois Lane, how she treats Clark Kent, it's not like she's being a bully or anything to Clark.
No,
it's
she's just kind of, he's just a coworker, and
there you go.
He's nothing to her, but she can't see him for who he really is. That's what's amazing. Those glasses, it's almost like the reverse of Batman. When Batman puts the mask on, you don't know who he is. You don't know he's really Bruce Wayne. But, reverse that with Superman. When he's got the glasses on, he's disguised as Clark Kent.
Yeah.
So
there you go.
Nobody knows it's Superman, but it's like, really, you can't tell through the glasses that's Superman. Okay, all right. But you see, he's that unassuming when he is Clark Kent. He's just not. You just don't see him as Superman.
Exactly.
So.
Yeah. And might as well go ahead and bring this up now, because with what Lex Luthor is plotting to do up to the
Yeah.
third act of the film.
Yeah, he is. His plot is to hijack a missile.
Yeah.
And
Well, launching a 50,000 megaton
500 megaton nuclear bomb and launch it at the San Andreas Fault,
Yes.
causing the West Coast basically to fall into the ocean.
Yep, causing earthquakes.
Yeah, like the worst kind of earthquakes.
Mm-hmm.
So
And he's planning to put something there, like
he's buying up all this land.
Exactly.
That he has on the other side of the San Andreas Fault. So he has already somehow calculated that when this bomb detonates in the San Andreas Fault, it'll cause a massive earthquake, and that part of the United States, the West Coast, will just fall off into the ocean,
Yep.
slide into the ocean, and then he's instantly got oceanfront property.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what he's after. He's a madman. I mean, you
He
have
is
to
a
look at it, it's like,
madman.
what, he's crazy,
Yeah.
but he's a genius. He's
And that's why he's definitely, especially with Gene Hackman's Lex Luthor, he's a really good Superman villain. So
yeah, and he has it. He finds out, he figures out that Superman.
he starts to, by the first movie, but then further on in the second installment, he starts to learn about a lot of Superman. And knowing about, one of the first things he does is knowing Superman's weakness,
Yes,
which being kryptonite.
and he when he lures Superman.
And that's the thing, because how Luthor lures Superman, which would be the first time that these two would meet, well, somehow Luthor managed to send a contact, managed to reach out / contact to Superman, kind of very similar to only a dog can hear this and such.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He did it on a frequency that he knew.
A private radio frequency just for Superman.
That only Superman could hear.
Yeah.
And so he lures him in, and he puts
Down in the sewer and through the subway and to Luthor's secret hideout.
and ends up putting a chain around his neck with the kryptonite.
Yeah, I mean, by first,
And-
showing Superman what he's planning to do.
Yeah.
And even, I think from Luthor and Otis naming a few things after themselves. Even Otis, as I
Yeah.
mentioned.
So he gets Superman good. He puts that kryptonite around his neck and pushes him in the swimming pool.
And even by this point, Lois and Jimmy, they just so happen to be at that location.
yeah, and
Doing some Daily Planet stuff, basically.
and there's one of the missiles goes astray, and it's headed to New Jersey, which is where Miss Tessmacher's mother lives.
Yeah.
So she bargains with Superman.
Yeah, even she was worried about this, and when telling Luthor about it,
She made
but
it-
Luthor, pardon my French, Luthor gave no shits. So,
Not one.
nope.
So she bargains with Superman, and she saves
Well, yeah,
him.
because after Luthor, tricking Superman into opening the box
Yep.
that is lead.
Yeah.
Because, that's another thing. Luthor discovering that one thing that Superman cannot see is lead.
Well, in any event, she bargains with Superman, makes him promise that he will save
Yeah.
New Jersey
After
first.
Luther put that around his neck and
So
threw
he
him
has to go-
threw him in Luther's own pool.
So he keeps his promise, and he saves Miss Tessmacher's mother.
Even though we
over in
don't
New Jersey.
see it on camera, but still.
No, but he's that's the first place he goes. Which
And
doing that
she even kissed him first, because
right, which doing that caused him to miss the missile that was going into the San Andreas Fault.
Yeah.
And then he has
Not
to
to
go,
mention it causes a dam to be destroyed.
Oh yeah,
Be
But
destroyed.
you see, he reverses all that anyway.
Yeah,
So when
but-
he flies around,
Yeah, we're building up to that. Just
Yeah.
yeah. Also, the whole thing where we saw Luthor, Otis, and Tessmacher in disguises
Yes.
in order to bring those missiles in.
Right.
What about what say on those scenes?
that was pretty cool. I liked that scene, how they did that. It was neat.
Yeah.
It
So,
was neat.
but yeah, and then because with Jimmy and Lois being there, in fact, Jimmy happens to be where the dam is.
Yeah.
And Superman managing to save Jimmy, and little did Superman know, and after saving Jimmy, Jimmy calling out to Superman about the mention of Lois.
Yeah.
And Lois, when the earthquake happens, right after she left a gas station, the earthquakes begin to happen, and her car goes down in those, cracks and such.
Yep.
And man, because all the gravel and dirt that go down, and she's having a hard time breathing and just not able to get out of the car.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, she's suffering in there.
Yeah.
And eventually, because when Lex found out that, Superman disposing one of the missiles, launching into space, and realizing, it's Miss Tessmacher. Miss Tessmacher!
Yep.
And by the way, as I mentioned earlier, that missile that Superman sends straight into space in the Donner Cut, that's where it frees the 3 Kryptonian criminals.
Yep.
Which I think I like that more. I'm just saying, and I'm pretty sure that's what was intended. So, besides those shots of the missile and such, that those were from when they filmed those in the late 1970s.
Yep.
And by incorporating that, rightfully so, in the Donner Cut.
Yep.
That's good to see. Not let those visual effects shots from the late 70s go to waste. But back on point, because Superman, when he finally makes his way there, but he didn't make it in time, because by this point Lois has died.
Yep.
She's suffocated in her car,
and
being buried almost.
And he is
in distraught.
He is absolutely distraught. He's
and
heartbroken.
The performance that Reeve delivers right there.
Oh my gosh, yeah, it's just
no.
Yeah,
and then he shouts and screams and launches into the sky.
Yeah, and literally turns back time.
Well, yeah, he's about to do that, but then thunder strikes and he hears the voice of Jor-El. Because Jor-El did bring this up to Kal-El, that it is forbidden to interfere with human time.
Yep.
But then we hear the voice of Jonathan Kent with what he said to his son before he died, You get my point.
Yeah.
In fact, even Clark, stated to his human mother, Martha, that all those powers that he had, he could have saved his human father.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, Superman, ignoring what his actual father, Jor-El, says, and does it anyways, reverses time, spinning the Earth backwards.
Yep.
Now, how did you first feel about that the very first time you saw this? That, I think even still to this day, people still find it like a head-scratcher kind of thing, just like, what?
Yeah.
I think even the Doug Walker, most prominently, aka the Nostalgia Critic, has made comments about that.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's kind of weird, it just,
And I told you this before, because fun fact, that was originally intended for it to be the ending of Superman 2, but the producers and such, they really liked this, and they wanted it to be for the ending of the first Superman film.
Right.
Yeah. So, I think overall for me, the whole thing of Superman reversing time, spinning the Earth backwards, most prominently in the first film, doesn't really bother me. Just I guess it could be possible for the character of Superman, and for this Superman.
Yeah, he turns back time, and basically he's traveling back through time, and he goes back to before that missile
one missile that would lead to the cause of Lois's death.
Exactly. And he stops it. So.
And he managed, I guess, to still stop the missiles, but But in the end, Lois is perfectly okay. And then when Jimmy catches up to them.
Yep.
In fact, Superman and Lois were this close to kiss, but when Jimmy stepped in.
Exactly.
And then, Superman then flying off, and then a little taste of when Lois, because Jimmy and Lois mentioning about Clark not being present when Superman's there, and Lois is like, wait a second, nah, that's impossible. Because
yeah, exactly.
A little taste of it, but until in the second installment.
Exactly.
Yeah, when it then starts to hit her fully, Really speculate that Clark is more likely maybe Superman, which she turns out to be right.
So I'm really curious, and I already know what you're going to say, but I'm really curious how you're going to end up rating this. So,
but we haven't even gotten to the last part of the film where he brings in Luthor and Otis to prison.
Oh yeah.
What about that ending?
Well, it was a good ending. I mean, it was a great ending because he takes him back. He takes him back to prison,
and we finally see Luthor being bald.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
And because and the one guy at the prison, thanking Superman, don't thank me, we're on the same side.
Oh yeah.
Good night.
Yeah.
And then the final epic shot where he, is up above Earth's atmosphere, in orbit, in space, and smiles for the camera and flies.
Yeah, I love that. I love that ending. That's a great ending.
Oh, yeah.
So...
That was a great way to end it off.
So,
okay, our final thoughts that we have to say about Superman the movie. You go first.
Final thoughts. Absolutely a classic. It was a groundbreaking film.
And even though there's no actual story going on, there technically is, but not fully.
It actually, to me, it set the standard for all superhero movies after that. It's like after that came out, it was like, well, this other stuff that they were probably thinking about doing, if there was any Marvel movies they were planning on, or they probably scrapped them when they saw Superman, because they realized what a good storyline it was, how believable it was.
Yes.
And that's the thing of it, is the audiences are smart now. You can't just throw something out there and expect people to believe it. You have to make it believable. And I know it sounds so far-fetched that there'd be a Superman,
And
but it is believable when you watch it on film.
Back in the late 70s, they succeeded on that.
I think they did. So
They definitely did. And again, with the whole thing of the tagline, "You will believe that a man can fly," we for sure did.
Yeah, and all I can say about it is it gets 5 stars for me.
And as for me, because and I couldn't have said it better, like with you, because even still, it's still a superhero masterpiece. It was one of those films in the 1970s that was a big game changer and solidified the superhero genre.
Mm-hmm.
And everything about the first Superman film, excellent. Really, it is.
Yeah, it is.
Definitely one of the top, if not one of the top best Superman films.
Agreed.
And you give it 5 stars?
5 stars.
And as for me, well, what the heck? 10 out of 10 stars. So again, for you, 5 stars, and for me, 10 out of 10 stars for Superman, the movie. And what about you guys? What do you think of the first Superman film, the very first Superman film from 1978? Your first experience with Superman, if this was one of your first introductions to the character of Superman entirely, and, if this was the very first Superman you watched, no matter what, like, even if you weren't there from, say, the late 1970s or whatever, just, and do you think that, because even though there's not much of a story going on, it's still good, of course, and your favorite moments, your favorite lines, moments that happen in this movie, and with the funny and emotional moments, John Williams' music and score, the amazing effects, everything, believing a man could fly, the great performances of Christopher Reeve, Margot Kidder, Marlon Brando, Gene Hackman, Ned Beatty, the list goes on, overall, what do you think of Superman, the movie itself from 1978, with what me and my dad have had to say, our review, and what did you think of our review? Leave comments and give this review video a like, as always. And so, guys, with all that being said, we thank you very much for watching. We hope you guys enjoyed our review of Superman, the movie from 1978. More review videos are coming your way. They're going to be awesome. Keep looking forward, and we will see you guys in the next video/review. And, well, the Superman review marathon has just begun, so stay tuned later tonight. It's just going to be me reviewing Superman 2. And wait until you see what version of Superman 2 I'm going to be reviewing. So any last words?
I must be off.
He says that, and for me, again, we thank you very much for watching, and this being the start of the Superman review marathon, and again, stay tuned later tonight for my review of Superman 2, and which version of Superman 2 that I'll be reviewing. Take care, and peace out.